So a lot of you might not remember, but about 5 years ago, there were not a whole lot of high-end Chi-Fi IEMs. Back then, it was basically the Moondrop S8 and the Softears RSV. They were kind of like the high end for Chi-Fi. They came in at just $700, but I think what they did was they did a good job of proving that Chi-Fi could compete with the big boys in the audio world. They were some of the best tuned IEMs that you could get, and frankly, they're still actually really good IEMs. But neither of them have been updated for 5 years until now. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and today we're taking a look at the new RSV Mark II from Softears. This is like the original, an all balanced armature set with 5 balanced armatures. And like the original, the price is around $700. Although at this time, it's actually only $700. The original was actually $730. So it's interesting to see 5 years later, we've got an updated version. It's actually cheaper than the original. I guess a bit of a sign of the times. But apart from that, like its kind of headline feature is, well, they say that they've re-engineered balanced armature base. So if you're not familiar with all balanced armature earphones, it's just a different type of driver, right? Rather than having a dynamic driver dedicated to the bass like most IEMs, this IEM, like the Moondrop S8 and the original RSV, uses all balanced armatures. And we don't need to go into exactly how balanced armatures work, but just know that balanced armatures are not really known for having excellent bass response. But here with the Mark II, Softears is trying to change that. Did they succeed? Well, for the past couple of weeks, I've been listening to the RSV Mark II, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. But before we get to that, a quick shout out to Softears for sending this IEM in for review. If you want to check out the Mark II, of course, I'll have them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go back to the table. We'll talk about what you get inside the box, physical form factor, build quality, fit and comfort, all that stuff. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the sound. Does this IEM live up to its re-engineered bass promises? And then also, we're going to do some comparisons with some other all-balanced armature sets that are maybe a little bit more modern. Some of them maybe a little bit of a throwback too. So look forward to that. But yeah, let's take a look. Here we go. Here is the packaging. It is a cube, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that I'm sure I've seen that before. Okay, actually, the last one I can remember was the oh my gosh, the lime ears. But interesting cube, and here's what you get inside this cube. Actually quite a bit, which maybe you should expect for this price point. Let's put the IEMs to the side for a bit and just kind of highlight some of the accessories. You get, of course, a carry case that's zippered and it is soft on the inside, plush. It's a little bit taller than your average IEM puck case. And I'll be honest, again, I generally prefer more compact earphone cases, but this is definitely a nicely built case. I don't know and anyone's going to complain about the build quality on it. Apart from that, you do also get a pair of booties. If you want to put your earphones in individual booties to protect them, you can, I suppose. I feel like this is pretty much overkill. I personally do not worry about this stuff, but if you do, it's included in the package. And there is also a microfiber towel, which is going to kind of Vanna White-esque escort in these other accessories that we can talk about. Starting with, I guess I'll just highlight this briefly. There is a cleaning tool. Don't think too hard about it, but if you need it, you need it. And it's in there in the box. Now, as far as ear tips, you get 2 different styles of silicone ear tips included in the box. And these come in 3 different sizes each, so you're gonna have no issue finding the right fit. And again, I like to see multiple styles of ear tips included because, again, I like to play with ear tips and find the right fit for me. Here's what I will say about these two, though. They're pretty similar in terms of their shape and fit. I wouldn't expect too big of a difference there, although you will notice that the materials are quite a bit different. Not only is this one clear, it is kind of like a tacky, gummy. It's also pretty thin in terms of the walls. Here's what I find typically with these ear tips. So this is like the Softears Ultra Clear ear tip. It is one of my favorite ear tips. I've bought multiple sets outside of the context of buying them with an earphone because I like to use them on other earphones as well. So it's a good ear tip. The one issue that I have with these ear tips is that because the silicone walls are so thin, I find that the large size just doesn't really work for me. I rarely get a seal when I use the larges because the wall will just kind of collapse and break the seal. So if you're using the large ear tips, you might find that you're gonna wanna gravitate toward these. Apart from the thickness of the walls and I guess the stiffness of the walls, there is also a difference in the stiffness of this core. You can see that the core on this ear tip is quite a bit stiffer than the one that you have over here, which, I don't know, I assume that has some sort of impact on the sound, but I would just play around with it in your own ear and see which ones you like better. Personally, I went with the ultra clears, although I went with the small size rather than the large one. The one other thing I did want to highlight briefly is this ear tip, which I do not believe is included in the package. This was shipped to me separately as a separate package, but this is like another version of the ultra clear that apparently Softears is starting to sell now that has, if you can see, a metal ring on the inside. I believe they market this as like the titanium upgrade to the ultra clears. I don't know that they're saying that this ring is titanium. That would be kind of surprising. But there is a metal ring in there. And here's what I can tell you about this. I've seen these metal rings in a number of different ear tips over the past like year or so, year and a half, maybe 2 years. These have been kind of popular, but I have personally never found these things to be pleasant. Typically, I feel this in my ear, and it was kind of the case here with these as well. And as far as like what it does to the sound, I mean, I don't really think it does anything to the sound. I measured the frequency response with these ear tips versus the original ultra clears. It's up on Squiggling if you want to check it out for yourself. I did, of course, listen to it as well, and there was no difference that popped out at me. So I don't know. Again, you're free to explore these things your own, but if you're considering buying these things separately because you want to experience titanium ear tips, well, I think it's kind of more of a meme than anything real and meaningful. But that said, let's move on to the rest of the build on this earphone, starting with the cable. And I got some really nice things to say about this cable, but we're gonna start with the bad things. And the bad things about this cable is that it only comes in 4.4 mil. There is no 3.5 mil single-ended version, and it's not like a swappable termination like we've seen on a bunch of other earphones, including some of Softears' own earphones, which is kind of surprising. In fact, their solution to 3.5 is this is included in the box, this little pigtail accessory, which I suppose does the job, but personally, I'm not a big fan of using dongles. Like I use digital audio players because I don't want to use dongles, and this is basically just making you use a dongle if you want to use 3.5 mil, which, I don't know. Not a big fan of that. Again, this is almost bordering on meme territory. We're talking about an IEM that only comes with a balanced connector. It's not really necessary because like the only good argument to use a balanced connector is that you get a lot more power out of your typical source, right? This little digital audio player has balanced and single-ended. It will be a lot louder on the balanced connector. But apart from that, it's not gonna sound different. And these earphones do not require a lot of power to get loud. So, yeah, not my favorite choice. Now, the rest of the cable, I do actually quite like. It is on the thick side. You might notice that. I don't know how much that's gonna come across here, but it is definitely on the thick, beefy side of cables, but generally the behavior is actually pretty good. You can see here that it is lying well. It is not particularly memory prone, and while it's maybe a little bit stiff because of how thick it is, it's not overly stiff. Like it's generally a nicely behaved cable. As you can kind of see on the outside, it's covered in kind of like this glossy, almost a plasticky material, which is an interesting feel. It's a little bit different than your average, I don't know, it's a more silicone wrapped cable. And it reminds me a lot of the cable that came with the Moondrop Cosmo. If that reference, like if you've used the Moondrop Cosmo, this is like kind of a smaller version of that cable. It's just like a little bit extra thick, a little bit plasticky and all black and sleek. And I don't know, I do kind of like it, apart from the 4.4 mil thing. There is a, I don't know, fairly chunky, but not obtrusive Y split here. You can see it does have very subtle RSV markings on it. In fact, I didn't even notice that until just this moment. That's how subtle it is. The other thing that I like about this cable is that it has a chin slider that pretty much stays in place. You'd see it's not the most stiffly positioned chin slider, but I actually found that to be very usable. And then of course, like many cables, it terminates into preformed ear hooks, like you got up here, as well as a 2-pin connector, which has a slight protrusion on it because the earphones actually do have a recessed fit, which is nice because, I don't know, a lot of the times these cables will come with a protrusion on it, but the IEM doesn't have a recess, which just makes the cable a little bit extra tall. In this case, it's a nice small protrusion and a small recess, which gives you just a little bit of extra stability. And also, this thing just doesn't stick up too high over the top of the earphone. Now, that will bring us into talking about the earpieces themselves, which I gotta say, I think are stinking awesome looking. Although I will say it looks actually a little bit more awesome here on camera with the lights than it will look in person, because without the lights, like these highlights that you're getting in this gloss bit, They don't really pop, and it does look maybe just a little bit understated, just a little bit all black. But once you get the lights on it, you get the accent here. It almost looks like it's kind of like a faux carbon fiber design underneath this glossy plastic. And oh, I really like this. I think this is a nice look, nice sense of depth. It has a nice aesthetic about it that is unique. I don't think I've seen other earphones with this design, and that much I really like. The rest of the earpiece I also really like. This is one of the best fitting earphones I've ever plugged into my ear. Now, I say that with a bit of a caveat because it's also a little bit on the large side. I'm gonna describe this as like a medium large fitting earphone, and I'll show you what it looks like in my ear in a bit. And also that the nozzle is a little bit on the long side, but it does end up being just like one of the, if not the tightest fits I've ever had in my ear, like the most stable, secure fitting earphones I've ever plugged in. And I just kind of love it. I love fitting this earphone. You can see that the backside of it is just kind of a solid black plastic. There's no translucency or being able to see inside, which is a little bit of a bummer because I like to see the insides of all balanced armature sets, especially since they're doing some interesting internal tubing. I think it's all 3D printed and stuff on the inside. So there's some interesting stuff going on in there, and it would be nice to see it. But I don't know. That's okay. Let me real quickly measure the ear tip or the ear nozzle for all you nozzle peepers. And it looks like it's about just under 6 millimeters here at the end. But you will note that there is also a lip on there, which can help hold on the ear tips. And let me see if I can measure it at the lip. That's actually going to be kind of hard because it's not exactly flat. But okay, we're going to have to do it like this. And it looks like we're looking at about a 6.7 mil at the lip. So it's fairly wide in terms of the nozzle. What's interesting is that this is actually a little bit on the narrow side, but that lip is I suppose fairly hefty. I'll just say this, in my ear, it fit very, very comfortably. But again, your mileage may vary because this thing does kind of just fill out all of my ear, which I suppose I can actually show you now. Throw some in my ear. This is one of those earphones too where I absolutely need to do this maneuver to make room in my ear canal for this thing to plug in, give it kind of like an anti-clockwise, well, I guess it depends on which ear we're doing, but do a little rotation to drop it into place. And you can see that, well, this is kind of filling up my entire ear. For me, it's in a good way. It just really locks in there nice and secure. It feels like it's just like deep in there. As I'm pulling it out, this is what I imagine fitting a custom earphone feels like. I don't have any custom earphones because I've not felt the need to go down that route. But this one kind of gives me the feeling of what it might be like to wear a custom. You can see that it does stick out a little bit past the anti-tragus here, but that the earphone itself has some molding there to catch onto the anti-tragus. And back here, it folds into the contra bowl just behind the helix. So generally just honestly a fantastic fitting earphone. But if you're looking for something that's like going to disappear into your ear to the point that like you don't feel it, I don't know that that's what this is going to be because it is quite large. It is going to take up a fair bit of space in that ear. But yeah, for me, it ended up being, just every time I peel it out, like even just saying the word peeling the earphone out of my ear probably is uncomfortable for you to hear. But having done it for the past couple of weeks with this earphone, I look forward to it, which is that's the sort of insight and content you look forward to on Super Review. But all that said, that is pretty much as I can say about the build quality of this earphone. So let us talk about the sound. And of course, as per usual, we're going to start with the frequency response graph, which I am delaying and pulling up. And here it is. So this is the frequency response that I've measured of the RSV Mark II. On my rig, if you want to check it out on SquigLink, it is linked in the description down below. There you can compare this frequency response to literally hundreds of other earphones that I've measured. But of course, we'll do a little bit of a analysis together here. Let's ignore the bass for a little bit because that is a lot of bass and we're going to talk about that bass. But up top, like you could almost describe this as like kind of a new meta neutral tuning. You can see that the mid-range is more or less kind of downsloped rather than kind of like the Harman, or sorry, it's like, what slope do we even call this? Like this is like forward slope, upsloped? I don't know, however you want to describe it, but it's kind of sloped the opposite of the Harman signature. And the Harman frequency response, Harman target is kind of like a thin V-shaped sound signature, whereas when you tilt the mid-range up here, I know it only looks like a little bit, but that, 1.5, 2 decibels does create just a more full kind of natural sounding mid-range that's less thin. And that's what we get here with the RSV Mark II. Now notable, this was also true of the original RSV. And so while I might say that this is kind of new meta-ish, it is notable that the RSV came out before anyone started talking about new meta. So really this is just RSV-ish. It just happens to coincide well with the current culture, we'll say. And you can see the upper mid-range is fairly forward actually. And the treble is, I'll say, not bright, not dark. It's kind of just in line with what you would expect. Versus like the tilted diffuse field sound signature, it does maybe have a little bit of extra sparkle up top, but generally you could say that this is more or less just kind of like a neutral sound signature, well, at least below 300 hertz, or sorry, above 300 hertz, because below 300 hertz, we've got a pretty massive bass boost going on here. There's a couple of interesting caveats to describe with this. So one, just like back to kind of like the marketing material for the RSV Mark II, Softears was trying to re-engineer balanced armature bass. And it looks like what they did by re-engineering balanced armature bass was just they boosted it a lot. It has a lot of bass, but the note here, and I talked about this also a little bit in the intro, balanced armatures are not known for, the bass is traditionally, it feels in the ear a little bit different than you might expect based on the frequency response graph. And I think that is absolutely the case here with the Mark II. This looks like straight giga bass, like way too much bass. Like this would be bloaty, smeary, boomy, boxy. And I'll talk about the quality of it more so when we get into the subjective listening impressions. But I will just say in terms of like the tonal balance, the bass is not as dominant as it appears here in the frequency response. Maybe if you looked at the frequency response on a 5128 rig that is doing a better job or a more accurate job of estimating acoustic impedances down low, this might look a little bit different. But nonetheless, to say it is still a bass boosted IEM, and it does come across warm and thick and meaty in the bass, but it is not quite as thick and meaty as you might expect from this graph. That is all I will say, but that will kind of lead us into talking about what it actually sounds like to my ear. What are my listening impressions? And just generally, I'll say that this tonal balance, I find to be excellent. I think this is an excellently tuned IEM, which was also true of the original, although versus the original, this is a whole lot more bass than what we got before. It's kind of like a nice mix of warm, kind of enveloping sound. It's also got a bit of a heaviness to it. But interestingly, I feel like the top end still comes across with kind of like a clinical precision about it. Like it is a nice clean top end, despite how much bass there is in the bottom. Now, let's talk about the treble in this thing. I think it has kind of a natural sense of sparkle to it. It is not an exaggerated or a fatiguing treble. It is well-defined, well-executed. I think the instruments are well-delineated. Imaging is satisfactory, maybe not exemplary, like if you're looking for something that has especially wide imaging. I don't think that the RSV Mark II does that, but also the original one didn't do that. But it is sufficiently good imaging. Again, the separation between the instruments, that delineation is all there. Like it sounds just about right. It kind of has like this almost crystalline sense of detail about it. It's just a clean treble. It's not dark, and frankly is kind of perfectly balanced with the frequency response. It sounds right. Now, talking about the bass, have they achieved their dynamic driver like bass goals, or have they re-engineered bass in some way that is meaningful? I mean, again, it is a lot of bass, and with certain tracks, like you do get actually some of that nice bass thwack. Like there's a track I use a lot of the times, at least lately, by Men I Trust. It's like their live execution of a song called "Oh Dove," and I guess maybe I'll link it in the description or something if you want to check it out for yourself. But this song just has, and this recording specifically, has these really satisfying bass wallops, like these thwacks, and it's a lot of fun to listen to on a set that does bass well. And here on the RSV Mark II, it comes across quite well. It is very good. The only thing I'll say about it though is I do still find it to be a little bit inconsistent in the way that I have kind of found with balanced armature bass, which is to say that from some songs, like especially songs that have a lot of bass in them, I think that the bass comes across pretty well here on the Mark II. But it's more the tracks that are a little bit on the bass light side of things that even having this much of a bass boost in the balanced armature bass still isn't quite giving it that same texture that you might expect of a dynamic driver bass, which is why, I don't know, I still think that there is a lot of merit into going down the hybrid route. If you still want that dynamic driver bass tactility, but you also want kind of the high-end tuning and cleanliness of the top end here on the RSV. So I don't think that it's quite dynamic driver replacement levels, but I also don't think that that is a thing that has to be true. Again, I'm kind of biased for all balanced armature sets, which is to say some of my favorite earphones are all balanced armatures. Their bass isn't the best thing about them, and that's okay sometimes. Here, however, it is a nice, satisfying bass most of the time. It's just a little bit inconsistent. I will also say that with some especially bass-heavy tracks, like again, like I mentioned this band a lot, Cigarettes After Sex, they just have a lot of kind of overbearing, droning sub-bass guitar or like bass guitar in their music. And well, that's a commentary on the mix of their music, but it can be pretty satisfying with the right sets. Here, I would say that it comes just a little bit across as a little bit too heavy, a little bit tubby, and almost disconnected from the rest of the music, not quite as defined as the top end. Well, I would say the top end is just a whole lot better executed than the bottom end, but the bottom end is not badly executed. In fact, it's probably some of the most physical bass that I've gotten out of an all-BA set, so I will give that to them. I just don't know that it's quite overcome the limitations of an all-balanced armature set. So, I don't know, apart from those comments on the bass, like there's kind of really no mistakes with this earphone. I would say like probably the biggest complaint you can make about it is that kind of like the original, it does lack a little bit of character, right? It lacks maybe a hook about it. It's just like a supremely competent, well-executed earphone that doesn't really do much wrong. But if you're looking for something that's maybe especially exciting or especially engaging, I don't know that the RSV Mark II is going to do that for you. But if you're looking for something that's kind of a nice all-rounder that you can kind of just look at and be like, it just does everything, the Mark II kind of is that. But also so was the original. Okay, now that said, I want to bring in a couple of other earphones for a comparison. And I think we're going to stick to all balanced armature sets. Like I mentioned, I have a bias for earphones that have just all balanced armatures for them. I don't know, there's something about them that I like. I don't know if it's the idea about them, if it's the sound about them, but I like them. So we've got a number to compare with. And here is the Symphonia Meteor, which price range on this, I believe, is $600. At least that's what it was when I bought it a couple of years ago. I don't know if things have changed since then, but also an all balanced armature set. I believe it's 4 balanced armatures versus the 5 that we've got in this one. And this one's notable because this is also known for being a very bassy, warm, heavy set. And in this comparison, it is definitely the warmer set of the bunch. I don't know that it's necessarily the one that's going to give you, however, more bass tactility or more bass presence out of it. They're both kind of even in terms of their bass presence, but the Meteor is overall still warmer, and I think a lot of that comes from kind of the upper mid-range area where the vocals might be a little bit more pushed forward. Here on the RSV, they're more relaxed on the Meteor. The Meteor just has like this warmer, more relaxed, more colored tune, but also makes it a little bit maybe more special in a sense. I think maybe, well, the Meteor is definitely the less all-rounder type earphone versus the RSV Mark II, but it is also maybe just a little bit more special and a little bit more engaging. I think the upper treble is a little bit more sparkly on the Meteor, and the mid-range, probably also related to the treble emphasis that you have here in the Meteor, does come across just a little bit more textured and a little bit more low contrast, but also like micro contrasty in a way that I find really, really addicting. So in terms of like the bass quality, I would say that the bass on the RSV is probably, when it hits well, it does sound a little bit closer to a dynamic driver, but maybe the bass on the Meteor is a little bit more consistent. Like the tracks that are maybe a little bit more bass light, they still feel warm and thick on this set, whereas here, again, it might lack some of that tactility in the bass that you get with a bassier song. So that's that comparison. Which one's better? I mean, they're both honestly fantastic IEMs. For me, I think the Meteor is just a little bit more special, more unique, so it stands out for me more. But if I'm looking for a one and done type of earphone, probably the RSV would be the better pick. Another all balanced armature set that is also known for being fairly warm and bassy is this. This is the new SA6 Mark II. So this is the follow-up to the original SA6, which is quite warm, quite bassy. And in fact, there is a switch here in the back that if you want to make it even bassier, you can. But I think you'd have to be a mad lad to want that. Just because, I don't know, it adds a lot more bass to it, but it's not especially good bass. I think in this comparison, this is also interesting because I think the SA6 Mark II also is more of a colored sound versus the RSV, which is more in the realm of neutral, apart from, you know, that big bass boost. This on the SA6, again, kind of similar to the Meteor in a sense, in that the upper mid-range isn't as pushed forward as you got here. The treble is a little bit more sparkly, although I find that the treble emphasis on the Mark II, or sorry, the SA6, comes across a little bit more jangly versus something like the Meteor, a little bit less integrated, and maybe the imaging is actually a little bit stronger on the SA6 Mark II because of that. But overall, I would say that these two, the Meteor and the RSV, are just two earphones I definitely prefer over the SA6. And then a lot of that also too is the bass. The bass is, there's a fair bit of bass on this earphone, but it's probably one of the, I feel bad saying the worst, but it is probably the worst bass here of the bunch that we're going to be looking at. It's just, it lacks a little bit of tactility in that attack. It can be nice, it can be okay, but it is even more inconsistent than what we get here on the RSV. Okay, what else can we bring on the table? I've got a bunch here. We might go through them all. So this is the 7th Acoustic Supernova, which is, while we just went through two other kind of bassy, warm, all balanced armature sets, this is an all balanced armature earphone, but it is definitely not a warm, bassy earphone. This is more of a clinical, high frequency focused earphone. More on, I would say this is closer to neutral overall for me, although it's also, I would say it is bright tilted. Imaging is just a lot sharper for me on the Supernova. This has like kind of a very vivid sense of that image, that stereo, that turning sound into the sense of space and instruments in space and like sounding like they're all around me. I feel like the Supernova does a fantastic job of that. That is why I love this earphone. Now, as far as bass comparisons, you're definitely going to get a lot more bass over here on the RSV. And depending on the music track, like that bass wallop I was talking about with the Men I Trust song, Oh Dove, you're definitely going to get more of it over here on the RSV. The bass on the Supernova is, at best, you could say neutral. Maybe you could even say it's a little bit on the bass light side, but it is what it is. When you get when the bass is done right, or this is in more the music mix, the Supernova's bass is not bad. But definitely I would say that the bass on the RSV sounds more dynamic driver-like, if that's what you're looking for. Okay, another earphone we can pull in. This is another Softears. This is the Studio 4, which came out, I want to say, almost 2 years ago at this point. But this is a 4-balanced armature set, quite a bit cheaper than this one. So this one only has one more driver. This one is, I think, $450, I believe is the price on this. So a fair bit cheaper. But the presence of one extra driver is not the biggest difference between these two earphones. The biggest difference is the tonality. The Studio 4 is definitely much more of a brighter, kind of livelier, more open sounding earphone. That sense of imaging is, I would say, a little bit more exaggerated, well, quite a bit more exaggerated here on the Studio 4. So if you're looking for a sound that gives you just a really strong sense of separation, kind of similar to how I was saying that the Supernova is more of a vivid image, you get more of that here also with the Studio 4. I think it is a little bit more smoothed over and kind of like the vocal region. Like you don't get quite the micro contrast and stuff that you would get with the Supernova or even with the RSV. So I think that's maybe a bit of a detractor and a bit of a limit here. And then also there's just a lot less bass on the Studio 4 versus the RSV. So you do actually get a pretty decent bit of tactility out of it. I actually like the bass on the Studio 4, but if you're looking for more of that more warm, relaxed sound and you really want those bass hits like an O-Dove to hit, well, the RSV is definitely going to do that better, which is going to bring us to our last comparison, which is Old Faithful, the S8. Hello, my old friend. I say that because when the original RSV came out, the S8, like I was kind of talking about up front, was kind of its, I don't want to say it's foil because they are more or less like Softears and Moondrop are kind of sister companies in a way. In fact, there are drivers in the S8, which they are marketed as Softears balanced armature drivers. So there's kind of like sibling rivalry, I suppose, of some sort. But they've always been kind of different, and they're still very different earphones in this comparison. Still all balanced armature sets. And unfortunately, the S8, I don't even think you can buy anymore, so I'm not even sure why I'm telling you about it. But it's still really good, and I still really like it. If you've heard the S8 versus the RSV, this is going to be the more lively, mid-rangey kind of vocal focused sound signature versus the RSV, which is a little bit more buttoned up and more neutral and kind of tighter in terms of its frequency response. This is just a lot more top end heavy. And it's not to the point that it sounds strident or uncomfortable or anything like that. It will sound a little bit thin, a little bit more, as I was kind of contrasting this versus the Harman Target, where you have a little bit more of that fuller mid-range versus a thinner mid-range. The S8 is closer to the Harman Target in terms of it being a little bit on the thin side in the mid-range, but it just gives it a really nice sense of imaging, really nicely textured vocal content, and just a lively experience that between these two, I probably still prefer the S8 for myself, but that's because I tend to prefer a lively vocal focused sound signature, and I prefer imaging over bass. If you prefer bass over imaging, you're probably going to prefer the RSV Mark II, which I think is probably enough of me talking about this earphone. I think I'm ready to tell you what I think about it. Out of 5 stars, the RSV Mark II, this is a very solid 4-star out of 5. I think this is a fantastic IEM. It is a welcome throwback to, I don't know, a simpler time when there were fewer $1,000 plus earphones to buy. At just $700, it's, okay, still a lot of money to spend for an earphone, but this is just excellently executed. Maybe it lacks some character, maybe it doesn't quite have the hook, but that could be a pro or a con depending on if you're looking for something that just works, in kind of like an Apple sort of way, or you're looking for something that has a little bit more character, maybe some flaws, in which case, I don't know that the RSV is what you should be looking for. But if you are looking for this one, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't yet, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked in the description, and I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.